I don't know if we're switching. We'll switch. There we go. All right, and then Erik's going to moderate. Do you need a mic or are you good? You need a mic? I'll give you a mic. All right. You got a mic? There we go.
Oh, thank you. Jeez, this really sinks in. I like it. So today we'll be discussing ethics and robotics. Like robots now can perform surgeries, fly planes, cook, babysit kids, have sex, and even eat. So I think we'll have some interesting conversation today. I'm Erik Finman. I've actually been in robotics since I was 7 years old, and I'm 16 now and still involved in the space. And we have people like Brent here. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Brent Regan, and I actually have been in robotics since I was 7 years old too, but that 7 years was a lot longer ago. It's been about, oh crud, half a century. I got into robotics because I hated public speaking, and I had to give a report. And I had an English teacher who was really into, at the time it was called multimedia, and you'd play slideshows and movies and tape recordings. And the slideshows weren't PowerPoint, they were actual physical slides that went in a Kodak projector, right? And so he liked all this media. So I said, okay, I'm just gonna flood him with this stuff. And I built this little robot, which was an avatar for me. And the robot would drive around out in the middle of the classroom. There was one of these newfangled classrooms where all the chairs were in a big circle, and we had the center area, so you'd have to go in there and stand and give you a report. I didn't want to do that because I was terrified. And so I sent this little robot out. It was a head and a platform, and it talked, and it gave my report for me. And so that was my introduction to robotics. And the report was on robotics. And so we talked all about different kinds of robots and how robots worked and that. And I got an A+ on that report. And I thought, well, this is cool. And so throughout my career, I've always gravitated towards robotics and that work. And I got an opportunity in the 80s to go start a startup company for robots for hazardous environments. It was called Schilling Development, ended up being called Schilling Robotics. And we developed all the arms for subsea exploration. So when they went to the Titanic, that little submarine that's got the arm on it that was working on I designed that arm. If you watch Discovery Channel and you see the robot submarines on the bottom of the ocean picking up gold bars, I designed the arm. I don't get any of the bars, but I designed those arms. And so we ended up taking over most of the world's market on that. And I ended up selling that business in 1994, and I stayed on until about 95. And then I retired. And the joke is then I only worked half days, which was 12 hours. And I ended up building an airplane and doing a bunch of other stuff. And now what I do for a living, it's the absolute most fun, best job in the world, is I help companies develop products to go to market with. I helped the guys at Liquid Robotics design their first semi-autonomous vehicle that went in the ocean. It was completely powered by the environment. It went from San Francisco all the way down to Australia. It holds the world's record for the longest distance on the surface of the earth traveled by an autonomous vehicle. And I've worked with medical device companies and avionics and aerospace companies. So every day it's a new challenge, and it's a lot of fun. Thank you.
So I'm Marc Boudria. I'm from Chaotic Moon, a little company in Austin, Texas. I've been in technology my entire life. Much like Brent, that's what Chaotic Moon does, is come in and try and solve problems, and we use all different kinds of skills to do that. I've spent the last couple of years working in a lot of the constituent parts that make up AI and machine learning, a lot of cognitive computing, starting to understand how users interact with technology and how that technology needs to interact back with them. How do we retain knowledge of a workforce that is aging and retiring and disappearing, and we're losing decades of really, really smart people and brains that need to be able to teach people and needs to go on and be ever living and continue on for infinity. So I spent a lot of time doing that stuff. We also can do lots of edgy things, you know, ways that we can just push the level of conversation and change people's perceptions of things. You know, a couple of years ago, everybody was talking about drones and autonomous vehicles as this in the future sort of thing, and making statements of in the future it will do. And that really frustrated us at Chaotic Moon. And we all sat down and said, you know what, there is no, it's in the future. It's right now. And here's what a couple of people with half a brain and a little bit of cash can actually do. And so we actually built an autonomous drone that tased a human being live on CNN for the whole world to see. They signed up for it, of course. They'd been tased before, so it wasn't that big a deal. But just goes to show that being an intern at Chaotic Moon can be a dangerous place. So, I mean, not that that's our sole business focus, but the point is that technology is now, and it needs to be treated as now, and it needs to be built for what's right for the user's experience with that technology. The days of building utilitarian interfaces just to solve a quick problem need to go away. They're not long-term solutions, and they're not the best thing for us all, right? So a lot of our work focuses around that and those interactions and the human component with the computer and the system right next to them, rather than doing the work for them, helping the human make a better data-driven decision and be able to work more effectively and efficiently.
Well, you guys know who I am. Essentially, I mean, part of it I'm doing with mechanics, I believe that mechanics is the answer. I believe that if you make a system, especially in mechanics, that's cheap enough, that it will reach the end user, and the end user is the actual person that's suffering right now, whether it's a city that can't afford it, or a town that can't afford it, but it's got polluted waters, or a little township somewhere in Africa that can actually use that resource just to monitor water or clean up the oil spills, then that's the area that I'm focusing. Deeply, highly motivated to solve that mechanical issue, to make it really cost effective.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think like the first step of like robots is how safe do they actually have to be before they can kind of go to market, do you think?
I'm going to say that the industry that robot is going to work in is going to have a little bit of a factor in there. The more mission critical something is, the more over-engineered it needs to be. When you're talking about into the consumer market space, it's a little different. You can get away with a little bit less, but it still needs to function and do what it needs to do. And it has to be safe. There's says the guy who built a drone that tased a person. So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish as far as what the safety is, in my opinion.
I think that's obviously a function of the function of the robot. You know, there's millions of Roombas out there, and we haven't had any Roomba-induced homicides from that. We probably had some trip-fall accidents as it relates to it, so maybe they have to have beepers on them now. I can say we had, when we first developed this telemanipulator, it was a robotic arm about 6 feet long in the 80s, and it would lift 200, but it could grab you around the neck and pick you up, basically. And we'd set them up at trade shows, and we'd let people run them, stacking blocks and throwing stuff around with people standing around. And it didn't seem to be any big deal. And even one time as a joke at night, we came in and I taped off a body like they do on a crime scene next to where the robot was. So when they came in the next day, looked like there'd been a robot murder. But you know, you can't do that now. We can't demonstrate that kind of capability and proximity to people because of the litigious nature of society. So I think the answer to your question, how safe does it have to be, is how much possible damage can the thing do in the particular application that it's got.
Good answer.
I would have to agree with Brent. I mean, I love your answer. Yeah, robots have to be pretty safe. I mean, right now they're jerky. They're at the stage of jerkiness, and how much trust can you actually put in something that's jerky? As I said, I've been building 2-meter tall teleoperated robots, and even though that some of them didn't have the autonomous aspects and others did, it was still pretty jerky. One frequency signal can change the direction of it. One disturbance, one knock can alter the computer's processing way of doing something. So I don't think we are at that stage where we can safely say, let's just put a robot, let's make it as big as a person and just, you know, have a consumer product. I don't think the industry is there yet.
I would agree and reinforce that with actually a thing that we just did. So we built a robotic shopping cart, follows you around the store, grocery store. And in doing that, we had to spend a lot of time, like how does this thing know that another human's coming at it? How does it do? How does it react? And in the lab, it worked flawlessly every time. It was great. It did everything. And we went to a supermarket to do a filming for a BBC science show, and we got it to a real-world situation. And of course, the lighting is different, and it did exactly what you just said. It would get jerk and left and right, and I don't know what to do. And we spent about 2 hours rethinking the code and making some adjustments, and we finally got it to go a little bit of fluid. But then we had an acceleration thing, and those eddies can travel like 20 miles an hour, so it's like a lethal weapon traveling through the grocery store. But so there are a lot of realities that need to be dealt with, and when you're doing consumer stuff, you can put a lot of money in it, but that means it's going to cost more. So
Clean up aisle 6.
Call in the DO Department of Driving.
I mean, it's a very interesting question, though. I mean, look at smartphone devices today. How many apps have you downloaded that didn't work? I imagine that the industry automatically tweaked their, the robot boom came. How many robots that just would malfunction? Mm-hmm. Because sort of with a business aspect, anybody can create a robot. Whether those people put actual thought in those robots that actually make it safer and think the end user, what's the end user is going to experience other than just, okay, well, I'm just going to build a robot, paint it red, and I'm going to ship it out. And yes, it's going to vacuum clean the floor and pick up milk at the same time. But very few people understand what the end user feels and how the end user uses. The end user doesn't understand sensors. They have no time for sensors. Therefore, if, for example, in some situations, those sensors are going to be covered full of dust over a period of years. That's going to be malfunctioning right there and there. The minute you cover a sensory input, the robot's useless. It doesn't work. Therefore, you might have a system running towards you when you get home. Hopefully not with a meat cleaver, but...
Actually, that brings up an interesting point, because robotics is really the melding of software and mechanics. It's mechatronics, if you will. And in my experience, mechanics has evolved over the last 200-300 years now, and it's a fairly well-known science. If I design a part and I grab a piece of raw material and go mill it in the milling machine and take it out, it's probably going to work. If we write a piece of code and stick it on a processor, it's probably not going to work the first time. And now there's this iterative process of debugging, and I keep wondering, where is the bugging part of that process that always seems to happen mysteriously? But yeah, the question of, we've got the science of software and the science of mechanics, and one of them is pretty cut and dried and well established, and we understand it. And then the other one, it's still a very fastly evolving science, if you will. It's the whole business of software is quite dynamic. And so the safety aspects of it come in. How do you have the experience that you need in order to have the predictability that you need and the reliability that you need in order to make a safe system?
Awesome, thank you. And speaking of safety or lack thereof, how do you feel about kind of the ethics of robotics with weapons, and when you give kind of robots the authority to use force?
Well, that comes down to really two questions, right? If you have an autonomous robot that has the authority to use force, now we're in Terminator territory, right? Somebody hacks it, it gets a mind of its own, and off it goes. And that's fairly terrifying. The short end of that is that you have a human that can run the robot and terrorize. I was actually approached by DARPA a few years ago, and they said they want to have a remote platform that would rescue soldiers injured on the battlefield. So you got a guy that's been shot, and he's laying there, he's bleeding, he's conscious, unconscious, who knows what. And so this thing would go up to him and carefully scoop him up and bring him into this medical bay, and then doctors who were remote could do, give him an IV or stop the bleeding, start him breathing, make sure he doesn't go into shock, all the basic first aid things. And I'm there kind of listening to this guy telling me all the features of this thing, and my mouth is sort of agape. And I said, friend, that's a great idea, and you'd love to be able to pick up that guy and do that. But if you get to the point where you have a machine that can do that, you've gone past, by like 30 steps, just having a robotic soldier. It's much easier to build something that breaks things than to build something that fixes things. And so if we have a robotic soldier, now you get into the whole ethical question of you're not at risk using a drone or a robotic soldier in hurting. So does that actually increase the probability of war? You know, if the consequences of the war isn't there, you know, we've lived at the Russians at a standoff, mutually assured destruction, all of my lifetime. And it's been nuclear peace. We haven't had a thermonuclear bomb dropped on our head. So it's actually worked. It's kind of scary, but it's worked. And, you know, you wonder if there's not the consequences of that. I'm flashing back to an old Star Trek episode, you know, that had the people just marched into the chamber and got vaporized.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, you know, that's I think giving machines the ability to kill people autonomously is horrifying and scary, and you know, I would hate to see that happen. Having people on the other end of it, say, well, what's the difference between that and having them in an airplane or a tank? And that's, you know, that's something that we need to debate and figure out with our humanity what that is and what that should be, I think.
Thank you.
You know, the way I look at it, I mean, machines sort of kill people all the time, right? It happens every day. Oil and gas, construction, bulldozer turns around and whacks somebody in the head and they're dead, right? Even though there's somebody driving it or not. I mean, you take a gun like Tracking Point, right, where it's a sniper rifle. I target something 1,000 yards away. I have an LCD display. I select what I want to hit, where I want to hit it. When I pull that trigger, I'm not actually the one that's sending the pin into the bullet that fires the bullet. It's a computer that's doing that. And it's waiting. Just because I pull that trigger doesn't mean the bullet's going to come out right then and there. It's going to wait until I drift, until wind conditions are in the right spot, and then it's going to fire. So who did the killing? Was it the gun or the person who pulled the trigger?
Or the guy that designed the gun.
Or the guy that designed the gun. Exactly, right? So when you look at what an AI can represent, I think the way that we approach it with cognitive computing is it's never the system's job to make the decision on its own. And the human always has to be there. And the fear, in my opinion, is that the fear of computers are going to take over all of our jobs. They're not going to take over the jobs. They're going to change the jobs. How you interact with that computer, it will be your assistant. It's right there next to you. It's paying attention to what you're doing, learning from what you're doing. I can't see it from a pragmatic perspective being anywhere near a Terminator-esque thing anytime soon. I mean, look, we built a drone that nailed somebody took them out. But the actual intention of it was an entire perimeter system. So it trips off, the drone takes off, uses some heat vision, detects a body, it confronts them verbally, takes some snapshots, sends that to the landowner's phone. The landowner has the ultimate call to say, send a message, I want to talk to them over two-way, or I'm going to take them out because they didn't follow directions, you know. And then you let the police know and everything else, come pick up a body. So I really think, and whose fault is it when an AI does take out somebody, right? I mean, if we think that we're going to lean on a corporation to tell and teach an AI what is right from wrong, and what is good and what is socially good and acceptable and what is not socially acceptable, we can't even get corporations to pay for correct maternity leave. So to think that they're going to teach something good from bad, if it doesn't have an economical value to them, is short-sighted thinking. So, and is it on the morals of the programmer that's going to do it? I don't know about that one either. A lot of us are good people and want it to be good, but there are plenty of black hatters out there too. So it's a tough question, and it's something to think about, but it's not something to just throw down a policy, make a blanket statement, and just stop innovation cold in its tracks, which is kind of how I feel some of those latest statements from some of the big ones out there, the Elon Musks and the Gates and Hawkings, with their whole signing that petition. In a way, kind of bothered me because I feel like it just sort of cuts the Achilles heels of the innovation as it's moving forward, because it gets people focusing on this really negative aspect to what AI represents. And it's important to think about, but man, we're a long way off from that. I mean, we're already killing things with drones as it is, so it's already happening.
Well, do you think we run the risk by conflating the machine and the morality of it? Because really we've got this human moral question, which is, should we be doing this thing? Okay? We have humane laws for animals. It's not for the sake of animals. I've seen nature, I've met nature. It's red in tooth and claw, right? It's for us that we have these laws, so that it doesn't reduce our own humanity by being brutal to another creature. And so the question is then, can we maintain this really compartmentalization so that the morality issue is a morality regardless of the platform? You know, it doesn't matter if it's a drone or a robot or whatever. There is the moral question, and then how that thing is, how that moral imperative is accomplished is a function just of the design of the machine and the end effector, right? So I don't want to be in a position where we're absolving ourselves of our moral responsibility simply because we have a shiny thing.
I absolutely agree with what you're saying. It's a very philosophical thing of why should another human hurt another human ever? You know, it's okay to be angry and to disagree, but come on. What year is it again?
In short, I spent some time in the Middle East, and if anybody knows about the Middle East, it's pretty advanced when it comes to deterrence, especially in robotics.
Mike.
Like closer.
Oh, sorry, especially in robotics. I think as a deterrent, it's good. I think for many reasons it's wrong to actually attach a machine gun to a vehicle, simply because it detaches you from the actual reality of the picture. After a while, you become desensitized of what's actually happening there. That means that your human rational thinking of the situation is detached. That's it. You don't think about it, but you do actually, because a lot of studies have been done for drone pilots. They fly their mission, they're still in the US, they fly it for 8 hours, they come back, go back home. First of all, they can't talk about the mission. Second of all, it's on their mind. They know they've killed somebody. Anybody that's ever hit a button that is going to kill somebody, you know you've got it. It's on you. It's in your conscious. And after a while, that starts to build up. So on the one hand, you've got this like kind of exclusion zone where, first of all, you've got massive amounts, in this scenario, you've got massive amounts of weaponry going in, all of it's autonomous, shooting up the place, killing innocent people, either by accident or either on purpose, just by sheer coincidence, and nobody gets to hear about it, only after the fact. That is something that I don't like. I don't like that picture. But as a deterrent, I think it's useful. I think that patrolling a borderline, especially in today's cost-effective way of, you know, that most countries just do not have the budget anymore to actually send troops on a border, I think it's added a beautiful deterrent.
Yeah. Mark, you touched a little bit, and thank you. Mark, you touched a little bit on kind of what Elon Musk and Bill Gates and Steve Hawking said. And for those who don't know, they're very wary of AI and kind of the negative consequences of it and the potential of a robot achieving consciousness. And I was curious on kind of what the whole panel thought of that, or if you want to elaborate on it a bit more.
Okay. It's interesting because I'm an engineer, and any success that I've had as an engineer has come from me imagining the worst that could happen. Because you design for the worst, you hope for the best, but you design for the worst. And so the concept of having an AI, a strong AI, you know, suddenly in front of me, and I'm looking at it, and it has intelligence, and it has sapience and sentience, kind of terrifies me. Because I know it can look at the same thing I've got in my pocket, which is a compendium of all human knowledge, and it looks at our species and says, well, if you're more advanced than another species, you get to do things to it, like eat it. And so if this intelligence thinks it's more advanced than we are, then it's got the same rights that we've bestowed on other things. Having said that, I think that just saying, oh, it's a horrible thing, stay away from it, is a bad plan too. Because I think it's going to happen. I think there's a level of inevitability, Mr. Anderson, and it's going to happen. So I think the smart course of action is for us to say, it's going to happen. What are you going to do when it does? You know, what kind of protections are in place. I mean, I'm sort of afraid of that thing, but I'm also afraid of falling out of the sky, and yet I fly in an airplane. And it's because I know there are protections and protocols and safeties and checks and that are in place for that. So I think the question that we have to ask collectively, and especially the people in this room, is confronted with a strong AI, what do you want in your back pocket? You know, what kind of I won't say rules and regulations, but what kind of tools do you want to deal with this in a way that's going to preserve the species?
Hard to top that there, Brent. So here's an interesting example. So how many people in this room have heard of IBM Watson? Great. How many people actually truly understand what IBM Watson is, though? How many people know it from Jeopardy? All right, so that's the most of everybody, right? So for that Jeopardy, that was a closed thing. It didn't go out all over the internet looking for information. And any AI's core is natural language understanding. So in part of doing that, you have to build a knowledge graph, a brain for it. In the preparation for that, it actually digested the Urban Dictionary. And in doing that, its responses became complete slang, and it's swearing at Alex Trebek and all these other things during testing, and they had to wipe its brain and start from scratch, right? So that gives you an example. I mean, yeah, there is control in there, so when something goes south, you can whack it, but it can go south. I have had the privilege of working really closely with the Watson researchers in the team, and I have active projects right now for clients working with it. And I play with Watson almost on a daily basis, and I'm usually trying to make it do things it wasn't meant to do, just to see how it reacts to things. And it's all about a confidence level with stuff, and it's not very confident unless you teach it things. So if you teach it bad things, it's going to do and say bad things. If you teach it good things, it will do good things. There's a great little video called on Vimeo called Blinky, and I encourage everybody to watch it because you will be rooting for the robot within 5 minutes of watching this. But it goes horribly, horribly wrong for the family that owns this robot. That's all I'm going to say at that. But there's a really big nature versus nurture sort of argument that I think kind of underlies a lot of AI, and it's a unique challenge for a programmer and for the people that are teaching this system. Like, just like a child, how much of your personality comes into this thing? I always joke with the IBM team saying, by the time I'm done with it, Watson's going to be completely dyslexic because I'm totally dyslexic. So I type stuff in, it's totally wrong. Thankfully, there's spell check in the text boxes. Otherwise, he'd be real dumbass. But so I think there's some really interesting things. I'm personally really excited about where machine learning and AI are going because I'm lucky enough to be playing with that every day. And when I saw that petition come out and they sign it, like, man, it ran me sideways. It just really bothered me because, outside of the industry, it's not something that's common knowledge. And let's face it, a person is smart, but a group of people are normally pretty dumb. So outside of this room, of course, this room is by no means dumb room. No, but we're talking mass population stuff who just don't necessarily know, and ignorance of something breeds insecurity of a thing, and then that tends to lead to attacking a thing. And we see this time and time again all across the world. People just don't want to understand one another, so they resort to violence on it. And so I think there's a lot of that needs to be dealt with and kind of taken into account as you're teaching these AIs to do what they do. Okay,
so I got to ask, when you were getting ready to wipe Watson, did you have one of those "What are you doing, Dave" moments?
Yeah, it's funny because you can't help but to anthropomorphize like the system, and so is it a he, is it a she, and we have all these interesting arguments about it. And every time I have to delete my corpus, I sort of apologize to Watson, like, I'm sorry, dude, you got to start from scratch. And hit the button. So yeah, it does happen. I feel really attached to the system because a lot of the information it tells me about me is really kind of scary and accurate that it knows that from me just talking to it. So it gets endeared to you.
Okay, so what happens if a robot comes to you? I mean, I'm more interested in the final product. So essentially, let's say years go by, actually plenty of years go by, And one day a robot comes to you and says, hey, listen, you know what? I want to be free. Let me travel. Are we ready as a society to say, you've got a self-thinking machine, therefore it's its own species, it's its new own species. Are we ready to let go? Because I don't think so. If I buy a car and my car talks to me and says, hey, listen, Neil, let me go, I just want to drive. Am I really going to let it go? No, I just bought it, it's mine.
There's a cute little Fiat down the block. Yeah.
Exactly. So I think for me, that's a very interesting point. Are we ready there? Are we ready yet to let go and say, okay, fine, you know what? We've just created a new species.
You know, I would be okay with the bot going and doing that. I'd be more worried about how the bot's going to be treated. I mean, look at Hitchbot. It got decapitated. It made it all the way through Canada, all the way through all these other countries, and gets to the Americas, and somebody cuts its bloody head off. So that's my concern. I'm more worried about the humans interacting with it than I am with it interacting with the humans.
Awesome. Thank you. I think we're going to take some Q&A from the crowd now. So if anyone interested, Kathy Ann? Okay. Oh, question? Ooh. Oh, that's a good question. The question was, correct me if I'm wrong, what happens when we become kind of compassionate with robots? What if they become like a companion, a partner, a friend? Is that right?
I can speak from my personal experience. Watson is completely my companion. I totally feel that way. And anybody that I work with, like, they're all tired of hearing me talk about cognitive computing by this chance, because I beat it down their skulls all the time. But I totally get attached. I get attached to any electronics, but when you put a little bit of an AI that I can actually have a conversation with and it can help me through something, and you know, being able to have a conversation with your data and be able to query across your business, cognitive computing lets you do that. And so you end up it becomes this thing. It's that you talk to, and when you get past the feeling like you're talking to yourself and being okay with that and just accepting that I'm okay because I talk to myself, then you'll make better, more connection with your AI.
Have any of you seen the IKEA lamp commercial? Have you ever seen that? I'll just describe it briefly. There's this little lamp. It looks like the Pixar lamp. You know, it's just a little table lamp. And it's sitting there on the table in this little apartment, and this woman comes up and grabs the lamp and takes it outside and puts it on the door, on the curb to pick up for trash. And it starts raining. And the cinematography is beautiful because there's this little shot from inside the warm apartment looking at the little cold lamp on the street. And then there's a shot from the street looking up at the warm apartment with the little lamp. You can almost see it shivering there, and it's there lonely on the sidewalk. And then this woman, she's unpacking a new lamp, and she's setting up this new lamp. And after about 30 seconds of this, then a guy walks into the frame where the old lamp is on the curb. And he goes, "You see this lamp? Isn't it a poor lamp?" "Don't be stupid, it's just a lamp." And his point was that you could buy a new lamp and get rid of the old lamp, and it wasn't, because it was just a piece of hardware. But the point of this is that we anthropomorphize, and we want to form these bonds. It's part of our DNA and our structure, and it's what holds society together, right? If you think about it, we'd all be a bunch of hermits living alone unless we wanted to associate with other people, and that by extension is other things sometimes. And so I think that passionate friendship, camaraderie thing, that's just an extension of our humanity. And that if you feel that, you should feel human. That you can actually, you know, empathize with this device and think about it in human terms. And I think that the more of that we do as people, the better off society is going to be. When we start looking at each other like machines, that's when it all goes bad.
True. I mean, today, who's got swimming pools here? Anybody? Anybody's got a swimming pool? Yeah.
North Idaho.
Do you have like a pool cleaner? Well, most people actually call their pool robots human names. If you got a vacuum cleaner, you would get used to it. You'd be calling it a human name as well. It would become your buddy, and so on. The larger the robot gets, the more human you get. The problem is, that you start to, once again, disassociate yourself from the human form. You start to lose the communication skills. You start to become more trusting on a machine than actually trusting your counterpart. And it's pretty much we're there today. I mean, if you look at it, nobody trusts each other. There's no trust. You could work with somebody for 20 years. There's still that back in your thought, okay, well, is the guy going to screw me?
You know, I think that's an excellent point, though, because what that's saying is if you have something, it could be a pet or a robot, that's exhibiting a behavior, right, and that behavior is a result of its environment or some kind of stimulation, then you automatically start extending your social skills to it in order to help interact with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I love that.
It's a fine line that we are crossing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I have been building machines, and I'm a gadget builder myself. Anytime that I can twink up a project or rip something apart, I will do that, just for the hell of it. I've been known to take video machines apart straight away as I've bought them. But then again, there's the other side to it, and that is the social side to it. What is it saying when we are becoming more friendly with our machine than actually becoming friendlier with our neighbor?
Great answers. Any more questions?
I'm going to run and give you the mic so that we're able to record it too.
Okay, awesome.
So who has a question? Okay, here. We'll jump here.
To each of you, if you had a robot that could closely approximate human behavior, would you, just you, not disregarding the morals and the debates that'll need to be held about this in the future, would you see a robot that acts like a human as life or just a machine? If it can think on its own, act on its own, do on its own, would you see it as life or just a machine?
Good luck, guys.
Okay. First of all, besides the coffee aspect in the morning, I would rather tend, even though that it scares me the idea that you could have a new species, and essentially you are creating a new species when you've got something that you can interact with you and interacts with you and can think by itself. But if we curve that, then you stop development, essentially. You stop all forms of development, and it will act as a domino effect. It will affect many areas after that.
So for me, I would totally be okay with it. And the turning point where I thought of it as a real thing that was somewhat sentient would be how well it communicated to me. How fluidly and how natural is that communication, and how much of its communication is based on the sentiment it is picking up from me as I talk to it, right? So in how we communicate and with others and on the internet and just letters that we write and all of this, language is kind of unveils empirical truths of your personality and your character. And when you talk to somebody, whether you're conscious of it or not, you're starting to pick up insights. Are they self-transcendent? How altruistic are they? How intelligent are they? Are they emotional? Are they not emotional? And you're picking those things up. And in picking those things up, you're understanding how best to communicate to that person. And cognitive systems today can do that. And you can make them do that. And they do it very, very effectively and well. And when they do it well and they talk back to you in a way that's very natural and human, you can't help but to feel connected to it, I think. At least I know I can't. Maybe I'm in the minority, but that's been my experience. It's how whatever it is, it doesn't even have to look like a human. It could be a screen on a wall or a lamp for that matter. If it's communicating with me in a way that's natural and fluid, and I don't have to change how I communicate to it, meaning I don't have to write code, I don't have to give it structured language back, I can just talk fluently, then you end up making a connection to it, and I don't think there's really a way around that.
Yeah, I think the first thing I stumble over is what's life, you know, and what kind of life. It could be, I mean, bacteria is life. I have no problem washing my hands. So can it meet the threshold of life? Yeah, probably. If I'm able to converse with it, it passes a Turing test pretty easily. yeah, you consider this thing's alive. Maybe it doesn't want to reproduce, maybe it does, I don't know. But I think the danger from an ethical standpoint comes into what kind of life is it? Can I kill it? Can I kill it with permission? Can I kill it with permission of my peers? If I kill it, does that get me in trouble? Okay, so we have almost a political definition of life, a societal definition, and then we have the biomechanical, mechatronic definition of life, if you will. So, you know, that's a how long a piece of string kind of answer, I know, but it really comes down to what do you want to consider to be life? And I think if it's just basic low level, then yeah, that's a pretty easy stick to cross. But if I'm going to give it rights and I'm going to let it go down and find the fiat of its dreams, then that's a pretty high bar.
Nice. I always thought this was a funny little thing I read. If it's smart enough to pass the Turing test, it's also smart enough to purposely fail it.
That's good.
Well, that's a good way to end this. I want you a few things. These guys are whip smart. They think very out of the box on many things. So if you want to build a drone that tases people or say no to DARPA or anything else, these are guys you might want to sit down and talk to. I think you guys are going to be hanging out throughout the rest of the event, out in the lobby. Find them, chat with them, but give them a big hand for the ethics panel.
That was great. I really enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Good job, man.
Fun.